My sister-in-law threw soup in my face when I refused to fund her lavish vacation, so I silently struck back and left her with no way to escape. I calmly left and stopped paying for everything, and now she is begging me on her knees. Sunday dinner had become a routine. Me, my husband Jim, our son Mark, and his wife Brittany. I make a nice meal and try to keep things pleasant, but Brittany always had a way of making the evening about her. This night was no different. We were halfway through dinner when she began. "You know," she said, putting down her fork with a dramatic sigh, "Mark and I have been so overwhelmed lately. We really need to get away, somewhere tropical maybe, but the prices are just crazy." I continued to eat, hoping she'd move on, but she didn't. "The flights alone are outrageous," she continued. "I mean, it would be so nice if somebody could help us out, just this once." I looked at her and then at Mark, who nodded as if her idea made perfect sense. "Brittany," I said, keeping my tone even, "we already help you with so much. A vacation isn't something we can justify." She didn't even blink. "But you could if you wanted to. It's not like you're struggling, is it? And Mark and I never ask for much." That made me laugh, but not because it was funny. "Brittany, who do you think pays your rent, your car insurance, and half the stuff you order online?" Her face darkened. "So you're saying no?" she said, her voice colder now. "I'm saying no," I confirmed. The table fell silent, except for the sound of Jim chewing softly. Brittany leaned back in her chair, looking at me as if I were the villain of the piece. Then, out of nowhere, she grabbed her soup bowl and threw it at me. Hot soup splashed all over my face, the heat stinging my skin. I was too shocked to move. Jim broke the silence, but instead of defending me, he looked at Brittany and said, "You didn't have to do that." Then he turned to me. "But Linda, you didn't have to be so difficult." Mark put his head down and said nothing. Brittany crossed her arms and smiled, looking like she'd just won something. I stood up, wiped my face with a napkin, and grabbed my bag. Without another word, I walked out. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. I could still feel the sting of the hot soup on my face and the weight of Jim's words. "You didn't have to be so difficult." Difficult? After all I'd done for Mark and Brittany, I was difficult for saying no to their endless demands? When Jim finally came downstairs, I didn't wait for him to start his usual small talk. "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. He blinked at me, halfway through pouring his coffee. "Done with what?" "Everything. I'm not paying her rent, groceries, car insurance, or any of her other bills anymore. Not a dime." The weight of Jim's words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. "Linda, you can't just cut them off like that," he said, his voice tinged with shock as he stood frozen, coffee pot still in hand. "Mark and Brittany rely on us. How are they supposed to manage without our support?" I fixed my gaze on him, feeling the sting of years of unacknowledged effort bubble to the surface. "They rely on me," I said, my voice steady but laced with quiet resolve. "And it's time they learn to stand on their own. They're not children anymore, Jim. They're adults, and they need to act like it." He opened his mouth to protest, his brow furrowing in that familiar way that signaled an argument was coming. But I wasn't having it. "Jim," I cut in, my tone sharper now, "Brittany threw soup in my face. And what did you do? You didn't stand up for me. You didn't call her out. Instead, you turned to me and said I was being difficult. If you're so worried about them, maybe you should dip into your golf fund to cover their expenses." My words landed like a stone, and for once Jim had no response. His silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. That evening I sat alone in the quiet of our home, the memory of that dinner replaying in my mind, the scalding soup, the smug curve of Brittany's lips, the way Mark avoided my eyes. I knew I couldn't let things continue as they were. With a deep breath, I dialed Mark's number, steeling myself for the conversation. When he answered, his voice hesitant, I didn't give him room to soften the blow. "Mark," I said, my words deliberate, "I'm giving you a heads up. Starting next month, your father and I are done paying your rent, your groceries, your bills, everything. You and Brittany are on your own now." "What?" His voice cracked, a mix of surprise and panic. "Mom, you can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, my resolve unwavering, "and I am. You're married, Mark. You have responsibilities. It's not my job to bankroll your life forever." A long silence stretched between us, and for a fleeting moment, I hoped he might offer an apology. Some acknowledgement of how far things had spiraled. Instead, he muttered, "Brittany's not going to be happy about this." "She doesn't need to be," I replied coolly. "Goodbye, Mark." I ended the call, my heart pounding with a strange cocktail of emotions: anger at their entitlement, sorrow for the distance growing between us, and a quiet, unfamiliar sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I had drawn a line in the sand. But I knew Brittany well enough to suspect she wouldn't accept it without a fight. A week later, the knock at my door came as no surprise. I opened it to find Brittany standing on the porch, her eyes red-rimmed but her smile carefully crafted, as if the soup incident were a distant memory. "Hi, Linda," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt rehearsed. "Can we talk?" I stood there, studying her. Beneath the sugary tone, there was a sharpness in her eyes, a hint of discomfort at having to lower herself to this moment. She wasn't used to begging, and it was clear she resented it. "Can we talk inside?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen in such a vulnerable state. Wordlessly, I stepped aside, letting her enter. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, echoing in the quiet house. She scanned the room, perhaps hoping Jim would appear to bolster her case, but he wasn't home. "Linda," she began, her voice measured, "I owe you an apology. Things got out of hand at dinner the other night, and I overreacted." I folded my arms, unimpressed. "Overreacted? Brittany, you threw a bowl of hot soup in my face." She flinched, but only for a moment before her composure returned. "I know, and I feel awful about it. That's why I'm here, to make things right." "Making things right starts with a real apology," I said, raising an eyebrow, my tone daring her to try harder. Her cheeks flushed, and she hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "I just said I feel awful," she replied, her voice teetering on the edge of defensiveness. "But you have to understand, Linda, I was under so much pressure. When you said no to the vacation, I lost it. You don't know how hard things have been for me." I stared at her, incredulous. Even now she was spinning the narrative, casting herself as the victim. "Brittany," I said, my voice slow and deliberate, "you don't get it, do you? For years I've poured everything into supporting you and Mark. Your rent, your groceries, your bills, things you should have been managing yourselves. And the second I set a boundary, you threw a tantrum like a spoiled child." Her expression flickered, a mix of defiance and desperation. She opened her mouth to respond, but I could see the wheels turning, calculating her next move. For years I'd carried the weight of their choices, their demands, their entitlement. And in that moment, standing in my own home, I realized I was done being their safety net. But Brittany's presence, her calculated vulnerability, told me this wasn't the end. She'd come with a purpose, and I braced myself for what was coming next. Brittany's expression tightened, a fleeting glimpse of defiance before melting into something softer, almost desperate. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "Please don't cut us off, we need you. Mark's job barely keeps us afloat, and with prices climbing every day." I held her gaze, my resolve like iron. "That's not my burden to bear," I said, my voice steady but heavy with finality. "You and Mark chose this path when you got married. It's your life to live, not mine to fund." Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering under the kitchen's dim light, and for a moment I thought she might crumble. Instead, she sank to her knees, hands clasped as if in prayer. "Please, Linda," she pleaded, her voice cracking like thin ice. "We'll lose the apartment without your help. Just a little longer, until we're steady again, I swear." It was a pitiful scene, her on the floor, her voice raw with desperation. Despite the anger still smoldering in my chest, a pang of pity stirred within me. But I kept my face impassive, unwilling to let her see it. "I'll consider it," I said at last, my tone measured. "But things will never go back to how they were. If I help, it'll be on my terms and mine alone." She nodded eagerly, as if grasping at any lifeline. But as she rose and smoothed the wrinkles from her dress, I caught it. A subtle shift in her demeanor. There was no real apology, no remorse for the soup she'd hurled at me, no acknowledgement of the years she'd leaned on my generosity without a shred of gratitude. Her words, though tearful, felt hollow, rehearsed. After she left, I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in around me. The empty space across from me seemed to echo the void between what I hoped for and what I knew to be true. Part of me wanted to believe Brittany had learned something, that her desperation signaled change. But deep down, I knew her too well. This wasn't the end of her demands. It was just another act in her carefully staged performance. The next day, I couldn't shake the weight of her visit. I needed to make things clear, to draw the line I'd been too soft to enforce before. I called Mark, my voice steady as I spoke. "Mark, I've made my decision. I'll cover your groceries for 3 months, but that's it. After that, you and Brittany are on your own. No rent, no bills, nothing." A long silence stretched over the line before he responded, his voice low. "Okay, Mom, but Brittany's not going to like this. She hasn't apologized to me," I said, my tone sharp, "so I'm not discussing this with her directly." He muttered something incoherent and hung up, leaving me with the dial tone and a growing sense of unease. Days passed without a word from them, and the quiet was unsettling. I'd grown used to their constant needs, their subtle manipulations, and this silence felt like the calm before a storm. A week later, Jim came home, his face lit with cautious optimism. "Mark and Brittany invited us for dinner," he said. "They want to make things right." "Make things right?" I echoed, my eyebrow arching skeptically. "We'll see." When we arrived at their apartment, the scene was almost too perfect, candles flickering on a pristine table, the air thick with the scent of roasted herbs, and Brittany radiant with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The evening began smoothly, but the facade didn't last. Mark cleared his throat, his tone tentative. "Mom, we're so grateful for everything you've done, but we were hoping you'd reconsider helping with the rent. Just for a few more months." "No," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "My decision stands." Brittany's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second. "Linda, that's not enough. You're leaving us with nothing. You have choices," I countered. "You're both adults. It's time you acted like it." Her gaze hardened, the mask of sweetness slipping to reveal a flash of resentment. The rest of the dinner passed in strained silence, the clink of cutlery the only sound breaking the tension. As Jim and I drove home, he glanced at me, his voice soft but laced with reproach. "Maybe you were too harsh with her." I didn't turn to face him. "Then you help them," I said, my words clipped. "I'm done." In that moment, the car felt too small, the air too thick with unspoken truths. I'd spent years carrying the weight of their expectations, smoothing over their mistakes, and now, for the first time, I was choosing myself. But the cost was clear, a fracture not just with Mark and Brittany, but with Jim, who couldn't see the toll it had taken. As the headlights cut through the dark, I wondered how long I could keep holding on to a life that no longer felt like mine. And that's when I realized that the rift between Jim and me was deeper than I had admitted. The days after that dinner were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Mark and Brittany didn't call, and Jim avoided the subject entirely. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Sure enough, Jim came home one night and dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking," he began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "Maybe we should pay their rent for a little while longer, just until they find a new place." I stared at him, the calm I'd been holding on to slipping away. "Jim, are you serious, after everything that's happened? After what she did?" "They're struggling," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. What kind of parents just leave their kids hanging? "They're not kids, Jim," I snapped. "And this isn't about helping them. This is about enabling them. I've been the one paying for everything while you sat back and let me do it. Now that I've said no, you want to swoop in and play hero?" His face darkened. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I repeated. "Fair was me paying their expenses for years without a single thank you. Fair was me walking out of that dinner covered in soup while you defended Brittany. And now you think I'm the bad guy?" We argued in circles for the better part of an hour. Jim couldn't, or wouldn't, see my side. By the end, I was exhausted and fed up. "I can't do this anymore, Jim," I finally said. "Not with them, not with you. If you want to keep supporting Mark and Brittany, go ahead, but don't expect me to stick around and watch." "What are you saying?" he asked in a low voice. "I'm saying I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavier than I'd expected. Jim looked stunned, but I felt nothing but relief. This had been building for years, and now it was finally out. He tried to talk me out of it, but I'd already made up my mind. For too long, I had put everyone else's needs before my own. It was time to put myself first. As I packed a bag and prepared to stay with a friend for a while, Jim sat quietly in the living room. For the first time, I saw the cracks in the life I'd been holding together. But instead of feeling sad, I felt free. After I left, I moved into a small rental about an hour away. It wasn't much, a small one-bedroom with dated cabinets and creaky floors. But it was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Jim and I hadn't talked much since I'd left, and I hadn't heard a peep from Mark or Brittany. I assumed they'd gotten the message. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Brittany. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" "Hi, Linda," she said, her voice strangely soft. I was wondering if we could get together. I have something I'd like to talk to you about. I hesitated. What is it, Brittany? It's hard to explain over the phone, she said quickly, but I promise it's important. I sighed, torn between shutting her down and hearing her out. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop near my apartment. When she arrived, she looked different, less polished than usual, almost nervous. She ordered coffee, sat across from me, and started talking before I could even get comfortable. Linda, first of all, I want to thank you for meeting me, she began. I know things have been tense between us. That's one way to put it, I said dryly. She smiled awkwardly and continued. I've been thinking a lot about how I've treated you, about how Mark and I have handled things, and I want to say I'm sorry. I raised an eyebrow. You're sorry? Yes, she said, nodding. I realize now that we took advantage of your generosity, and I don't blame you for cutting us off. I probably would have done the same in your place. Her words sounded sincere, but I knew Brittany well enough to be cautious. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. She took a deep breath. I've come to ask you for one last favor. After this, I promise you'll never hear me ask for anything again. I crossed my arms. And what would that be? She looked out the window and hesitated. A car, she said finally. I blinked. A car? Yes, she said quickly, her words tumbling out. Mark and I have been trying to make ends meet, but our car broke down last week. We can't afford to fix it, let alone buy a new one, and without a car, it's going to be impossible for me to get to work, for Mark to get to job interviews. This is the last thing we'll ever ask for, Linda, I swear. I stared at her, trying to process what I had just heard. After everything, she had the audacity to ask for a car. Brittany, I said slowly, do you realize how that sounds? You're sitting here telling me you're sorry for taking advantage of me, and then you ask for something else. I know how it sounds, she said, looking genuinely confused, but I mean it. This is the last thing. If you do this for us, I'll never ask for anything again. I'll even sign something if you want me to. I didn't say anything for a long time, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Finally, I sighed. I'll think about it, I said. Her face lit up. Thank you, Linda. You have no idea how much that means. As she left, I sat staring at my coffee, wondering if I'd just been played again or if, for once, Brittany was actually being honest. For 4 days, I struggled with Brittany's request. A car was a big ask, and part of me wanted to say no. But I thought of Mark. He wasn't innocent in all of this, but I knew he would struggle without reliable transportation. In the end, I called Brittany and told her to meet me. When we sat down, I got right to the point. I've decided to help, I said, but here's the deal. It'll be a used car, in my name, and you'll take care of the insurance and maintenance. If you miss payments or neglect it, I will take it back. This isn't a gift, it's a chance to get back on your feet, and it's the last thing you'll ever get from me. She nodded quickly, agreeing to everything. A week later, she and Mark had a modest used sedan. As I handed her the keys, I looked her in the eye and said, "Don't make me regret this." She promised not to, but as I drove home, I couldn't help but wonder if I had just opened the door to more of the same. A few weeks went by after I helped Brittany and Mark get their car, and things were strangely quiet. Too quiet. No updates, no thank yous, nothing. It wasn't like Brittany to stay silent for long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from an old neighbor who lived near their apartment. "Hey Linda," the message said. "I just saw Brittany driving a shiny new SUV. I guess things are looking up for her. Thought you'd like to know." I read the message twice, convinced I had misunderstood. A new SUV? After all, where in the world did they get the money for that? Curiosity got the better of me. The next morning, I decided to drive by their apartment to see for myself. When I pulled up, there was a spotless, brand-new SUV parked right out front. It gleamed in the sunlight, almost mocking me. I looked around for the modest used car I'd just helped them buy, but it wasn't there. My stomach sank. Later that day, I texted Mark. "Where's the car I helped you get?" I asked bluntly. His reply came quickly. "We traded it in for the SUV. Brittany got a great deal, don't worry. The payments are manageable." I stared at the message, stunned. Traded it in? After all the pleading about how much they needed help? For a moment, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or scream. Brittany had promised that this was the last thing she'd ever ask for, but now it seemed she'd already twisted my help into something else entirely, just as I'd feared.